Welcome back to the Grace Students Podcast. My name is Scott, and thank you so much for taking a couple of moments to watch this continuing conversation with Bryan, myself, my wife Carly, and Jay. We are all back again for part 2 of this conversation where we're talking about relationships as a whole. And in this podcast, we're going to be kind of diving into what happens when you find your identity in being in a relationship and how that can kind of carry itself out. So stay tuned for all of that and more on this episode of the Grace Students Podcast. All right, so we are continuing this conversation. And so...
What's up, guys?
What is up? This is going to be a very heavy, kind of heavy topic, but Bryan is back with us again. Bryan, how are you?
I'm doing well, Scott. My Starbucks is getting a little low here, but
too bad they don't deliver.
It doesn't bode well for the rest of the conversation, but it served me well at the beginning. So
yes.
I'm a little jazzed right now, so I'm excited to be here.
And Jay, you're gonna have to keep him in check as we go throughout the episode.
That always goes so well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And same with Carly. Thanks again for joining us. You made it through the first one.
1 down, 3 to go.
That's right. It's a great outlook.
So, yeah, we're excited to have the ladies here in the studio with us again. So, but we also want to know your feedback. This is kind of part 2 in a series on relationships. And so if you got a chance to watch the first one, give us some feedback on that. Or maybe if you didn't, run back and watch that one, maybe even before you watch this one, so you have a little bit of a context of what we're talking about. One of the things we mentioned in part 1 was this idea of pursuing Jesus, and how if we don't put that as a priority, then we often can find our worth in our relationships or our relationship status, maybe even. And so we want to unpack that a little bit in this episode and talk about maybe some of the ramifications of when we're putting so much focus and emphasis and worth in our relationship status. What are some of the things that causes us to do? Because we do what we believe, and if we believe our relationship is what defines us, it's going to drive us to do some certain things. So what's your guys' take on some of what can flow from that if we think our relationship is everything we got?
Well, I definitely think that we can jump into some things that maybe we're not ready for or supposed to be doing. And I don't know. I don't know.
I've had several conversations with teen girls because that's what we do and that's what we love. And my heart breaks for girls who get caught up in feeling like what their worth is in regards to a boy. I really work and think and pray for these girls that they understand their worth in Jesus Christ, and that when they fall into a peer pressure situation, whether that's hooking up a little bit too soon, before marriage, or pictures, or they just how much that diminishes their worth and who they are. And I just always really pray and desire to communicate so much of that they are worth so much more, like Jesus Christ died for them, because he loves them and cares for them, and that they don't need to cheapen themselves to give themselves over to that impurity and making themselves less than who they really should be in Christ. So, that's
heavy.
That's heavy. It's heavy, and I really, my heart breaks for when we find ourselves trapped in that.
Doesn't that go back to when you're young? Your parents or friends might be like, "Oh, it's just puppy love," And like when you get to a certain age, it's like, no, this isn't puppy love. Like this, I truly love this person. And so then you start to take shortcuts because you're like, well, I really love this person. So how can I show them how much I love them?
Right.
You know, and that kind of leads down to what you were saying. Like, and so I think that it's and with technology today, it's so easy for young people and even, you know, older people to slip into situations where, you know, we're jumping the gun and we think that when you're young and you're just dating or whatever, like this has to be the person because maybe no one else will like me down the road.
And we're so short-sighted in that.
Yes. And it's like, well, this person's never made me feel like anyone ever has before. And it's like, well, right, because it would be unrealistic to think that someone would have when you were young. Like, you know what I mean? So I think that it's so easy to get caught up in that. And so I think that kind of plays into the is there only one person for you kind of thing, which I think is a complete mischaracterization of what love is.
Sure.
But I mean, Bryan, what are your thoughts on like differentiating the puppy love and then with how do you safeguard against the technology and that peer pressure as a guy?
That's a loaded question.
It really is. I noticed that halfway through whenever I was adding more
How much
stipulations.
time do we have left? This is only part 2. So, no, I think there's a couple things to your question, but
Yeah, a lot.
One would be, I think most of our audience, I think it is genuine feelings of love. I don't think that really puppy love is an issue. I think it's legitimate in the relationship, and I think that's one of the mistakes that we as adults can make is trivializing those feelings and trivializing what
Right.
the relationship that they're tracking through. And so I think it's important for us to realize, no, these are legit feelings, and it's tumultuous to try to process through those in middle school and high school.
Yeah.
I mean, heaven knows we have.
Tumultuous. That was a big word.
Are you keeping me in check? We have experience in that. We were in middle school and high school at some point, so we get you. We know the difficulty of processing through that. The thing we don't get is processing through that in that age with technology because we didn't, and that's just it means we're old.
Unfortunately.
So we were. I mean, this is going to date us, but we got married the same year as the iPhone came out. So
Yeah. Thanks for that.
When was that?
So
2007.
Oh.
So, yeah. But that said, we do understand a little bit of technology because we embrace it and we try to utilize it. But especially from a guy's perspective, it can be easy to use technology to pressure your girlfriend or pressure a random girl into something,
Right.
either sending you nudes or like, hey, do you want to hook up kind of a thing because you're hiding behind the screen and you're in a situation where it feels a little more anonymous. And if it's in the context of a relationship, boyfriend-girlfriend thing, that can, if your worth is in your relationship, that can be almost, this is how it is. Like this is what you do when you're in a relationship. The guy asks for it or wants it, and so I need to respond. So as a guy, you've got to put yourself in the position of loving your girlfriend like Jesus does, right? Like which means sacrificial, which means selflessness, which means not selfishly seeing what you can get out of her, and to understand that the only place for sexual things to happen is in marriage, right? That's just the way God has designed it to be. Like she's not yours. Like you don't get access to her like you would if she was your wife. So don't act like you do, and don't put that pressure on her because that's something that she is trying to process through, and you have to help lead her in that, not lead her into to sin, which I think, I mean, guys, we're just prone to do that because we want to satisfy our selfishness.
And I think with girls, speaking to that, just how you were saying, to love her and to lead her well, that's not, you look out for her. You're not cheapening her. You're not asking something of her that is not yours.
Right.
And so then I would speak to the girl, and if there is a boy, and I know that this is easier said than done when you're in the midst of it. because you can rationalize and make choices that aren't great in a moment. So totally understanding all of that. But I think if you're either in a relationship or you just have a random guy asking those things of you, being able to know and decipher the difference of like, this boy is not for me. This boy does not love me the way that he should be. So speaking a little bit to that on the girl end, I guess.
Easier said than done, for sure.
Easier, for sure, yeah.
Yeah. But I think that also speaks to another issue of when you find yourself in a dating relationship, especially as a student, your tendency is to isolate yourself from even maybe your friends.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, I'd rather spend all my time with my boyfriend or my girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And if you guys don't call them that anymore, you got to tell us what you call them because we're old. So that's all we know. But like your bae or your whatever. But if I could implore you, don't isolate yourself, because surround yourself with Jesus people and listen to them when they give you caution, especially your parents. We say a lot on the podcast. Your parents know things, right? They've experienced more than you. They have more wisdom that you don't have. The tendency can be like, they don't understand. They don't know how it is. Or even your friends, like, man, they don't know what I got here. And so we can tend to isolate ourselves, and then we miss the red flags.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot in that. And
hey,
maybe,
it was your question.
I know. and I would say there is maybe some truth to, and you said it before, like, we don't know the exact pressure because, like, we didn't grow up in the Snapchat culture.
Right.
But the one thing that doesn't change is the principle in the teachings of what the Bible says. And so I think it's very important to be able to say no, in the context of a relationship. No, we do need to be around other people that are following Jesus, and aside from just the biblical, consequences, we'll say, I mean, seriously, nothing disappears once you send it. Like,
right.
The best way to save yourself from having something slip or get leaked or, taken off of someone's phone is to not send it in the first place. Everything is stored somewhere. And so if you're thinking, oh, well, it was just an innocent, one-time thing, it's dangerous. I mean, and so just heavily caution against that. But I guess so when you're deciding, you have an attraction to someone, and maybe they have a reputation for being someone who, hasn't treated people well in the past. I mean, what would be some things that you might suggest to someone who might want to pursue that individual? Because they might be like the prize, you think of titles like the quarterback or the head cheerleader,
Right.
Those are the people that are, supposedly the best, right? I don't know. I was never one, so.
Like the popular guy.
Right.
Or even, I don't really know what it is, the attraction to a bad boy.
Or a bad boy.
something.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Wait a second.
What was the question?
Like, what are some things you would say
Yeah.
In the event that you find yourself cautioning somebody or
I guess I would probably just speak to a little bit of wisdom, like ask them to maybe think a little bit further down the line in regards to pursuing something like that, and then what they're thinking that this would go to or what they're wanting to get out of it. I think I would just start with just a lot of questioning. What is your motive for that? Or I think that's where I'd probably go with something like that. Like, just start the questions.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like questions get you far. I don't know.
Anything you want to add, Car?
Were you ever, interested in a bad boy?
I mean, every guy I dated since before Scott.
ooh, what does that say about you? I don't think we wanted to get down this road.
I'm just kidding. Okay.
That's in part 3.
Yeah.
This just became a 7-part series.
Yes.
No, you make a good point.
I
though.
think I come from a different avenue because I was not a Jesus follower when I was dating. And so, and I didn't look for people who were.
Yeah, so your framework is different.
And so my framework is totally different.
Right.
And so when I was dating, it was purely out of selfishness. It was, what can I get? What do I want? Growing up, my home life was different than probably a lot of people who are watching this podcast. Like I had a father who was totally out of the picture and no real great, strong male figure in my life. And so I put a lot of emphasis on the person that I wanted or was dating or was crushing on. That's probably really old.
I don't know.
It's all right.
And so I think looking back, obviously my focus was off very badly. And so I think that you really need to have a strong base in Jesus first, in your faith, and before you start looking for other things to fulfill you.
Yeah.
Like, because
Yeah.
nothing else is going to.
Yeah, and you
Right.
have a little bit of experience in that. Like, okay, so I didn't have a framework of seeking Jesus before men, and like that didn't satisfy, and that
Right.
that didn't get me anywhere.
No, it doesn't, because there's only one thing that satisfies.
Right.
And so that needs to be your basis. That needs to be your strength first.
Right.
And then other things are sort of a gift.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
And
Well-
go ahead.
Well, and what I would say, stemming off of both of those, is the caution that I would offer is this person pursuing Jesus?
Yeah.
Because if they're not, then they're not for you either,
Yeah.
and they're not going to be. And that's the question that nobody wants to ask about somebody that they want to date, because the physical attraction generally is the precursor there, and we never want to be like, who cares about that?
Or I can fix them.
I can
Yeah,
change.
like,
I can change
that
it.
was,
will, you know? But that's a misnomer. Like, you've got to ask that question out of the gate. And if not, you're just headed for trouble.
In every relationship, there will be a piece of you that feels empty, that
Yeah.
feels like you need something more. And I think Jesus is always going to be that piece
Right.
that brings you in.
So we want to wrap up this episode, and that actually is a good way to lead into our next one. We're going to talk about this idea of satisfaction and how we pursue it in relationships, and what relationships are designed to do in the context of how we find satisfaction. One thing that we want to say to anybody that's listening or watching, your worth is not in your boyfriend or your girlfriend, right? Your worth is not in how many pictures of girls you have on your phone. It's not in how many guys think you're pretty, or it's not in any of that. Your worth is in the fact that you're made in the image of God, and Jesus is pursuing you for relationship. And that's the good news of the gospel, is that God loves you so much that he actually sent his son to pursue you and to buy you back. That's where your worth is. So if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I don't have anybody, or I find myself in a situation that doesn't sound like what I should be in, there's help for that. So reach out to us. You guys know how to reach us. Message us. Shoot us a message, even if it's on social media. It's just a private message. We'll respond to you with help. So thanks for joining us in the studio again, ladies. It's just fun
Let's do it again.
to be able to talk. I think we do have something on the schedule for that. So
Yeah. Next week.
next week. But it's fun to be able to talk through this with you guys, and for everyone to be able to listen in. So, but that's a wrap for today. So we'll see you guys later.
See ya.